Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Like she said, I'm a cybersecurity auditor at Google, and today I'm going to be talking a little bit about data centers and the intersection between data centers and cybersecurity, or data center physical security and cybersecurity. So I'm currently a cybersecurity auditor, but prior to that, I got my start in technology by doing customer support at a teeny tiny startup. My first manager in a technical role was Butch Mayhew. Was anyone at Sergey's talk earlier? Maybe, maybe not. Okay, we had the same manager and mentor, and it certainly helped us go to good places. But I worked at that company for about 6 years, moved up into software testing, and then I was recruited by Google's internal audit department because they were looking for more technical auditors who could do basic SQL queries, read code, and just had experience talking with developers and experience with the software development lifecycle. So I was a cloud and technical infrastructure auditor for about 3 years, where I mostly focused on the physical security aspects of data centers. And then, like I said, I moved into cybersecurity now. I also really enjoy D&D, video games, and hiking. If you want to talk to me about something afterwards that's not cybersecurity or physical security. And then lastly, I speak for myself, so anything that I express today is my own opinion and not representative of my employer. My hope today is to show you that by adopting a physical security mindset, that you can improve your cybersecurity controls and overall cyber defenses. The first thing I'm going to talk about is like a very, very brief internal audit introduction. Has anyone ever worked with auditors? I'm so sorry. It's never a fun time, but it is sometimes a necessary evil. But for those of you that haven't interacted with audit, I'll give you kind of a brief intro of what we are, what we do, and then some of the vocab words that I'll be using throughout, because audit, for those of you that have worked with audit language and like actual engineering language is very different. And then I'm going to walk through the physical security controls that are in place at Google data centers. And then I'm going to talk about how you can apply some of the same concepts that are used for physical security to cybersecurity. So, is anyone familiar with the Watchers from Marvel? Anyone? Yes, okay. So I think of auditors as like the Watchers. For those of you that don't know, they're kind of like omnipotent or omniscient beings that are looking over everything and just watching, observing, which is what auditors do. We are a group within an organization that reviews its internal systems and processes to improve operations and ensure compliance. But we essentially just watch everything that's happening, but instead of keeping it to ourselves, we report it up to the audit committee, which sits on a board of directors, and we're kind of like the last line of defense to ensure that no fraud is happening or nothing is out of compliance. A couple vocab words that I will use today are risk and control. I'll probably use those quite a bit. And in this context, a risk, something bad that can happen. An example would be kind of like a malicious person stealing a hard drive from a data center. And then control is something that stops that bad thing from happening. For an example, server cages are access control via locks, or server cages have alarms on them that will notify you if somebody tries to force it open. Okay, this is my favorite portion of the talk, where I'm just going to walk through all of the physical security controls that are at data centers. All of the data centers have at least 6 layers of controls. Some data centers have more controls, no data centers have less controls. This one is a data center in South Carolina, and this one actually does have a seventh layer of defense. It's that pond in the top left corner does have alligators in it, so watch out. But the first layer of defense that is for every data center is our fencing and signage layer, and this is the exterior perimeter. So signs saying do not enter. We have anti-climb fences that have to be certain heights. And then we also have property boundaries. Sometimes there's an additional fence layer that maybe we have tall anti-climb fences, and then there are also kind of shorter fences that are just more of a deterrent. The next layer is the secure perimeter, and this is where the more intense controls start kicking in. So there are guard patrols where you have to have a badge and you have to be able to badge into the data center. I think less than 2% of Google employees have access to the data center, so it's highly restricted. And then there are vehicle crash barriers and also guard patrols. There are also thermal cameras and visual cameras, and some of the fences have motion sensors in them as well, so if anything shakes the fence, it'll initiate an alarm. And the thermal cameras and visual cameras all have overlapping coverage. There is a downside though. They have a rule that you can't ride. Have you heard of the G-bikes? They're like Google bikes that everyone rides around, but the rule is you can't ride a bike over a crash barrier. And one day during an audit, I almost rode a bike over the crash barrier, and I stopped and then ended up falling off the bike, and it was captured on video and watched later by the security team. So be very careful about what you do. Layer 3 is building access. So as you saw, there are lots of buildings around the campus. Every single door on every single building is access controlled, and the access control gets stricter and stricter as you get closer to the most important areas of a data center. There are door alarms on every door, and they'll have varying levels of severity based on the sensitivity of the area, but every single door does have an alarm and access control. And then there's also a very strong no tailgating rule, and there are automated detections in place for anti-tailgating, and then also the people are trained very, very well to not let someone in after them. A lot of like companies and corporations, people will sometimes like very kindly hold the door open for you, especially if you have a badge that matches. Not here. They will slam the door in your face, and if they don't, someone will make you go back outside and badge in. Layer 4 is the SOC, and this is even more restricted, and it's 24-hour surveillance of the entire building and badge restricted. This one is kind of a smaller SOC. I'm not sure which data center this is for. For the data center that I showed at the start, the SOC is like 4 by 4 layers of desks like this. The lights are all low. There's like Red Bull everywhere. It makes you feel like you're in a spy movie when you're inside of them, but there's always people there 24/7 just keeping an eye on all the alarms. And then the 5th layer, this is my favorite layer, the server floor. I don't know, I've always loved like the smell of warm computers, which unfortunately Google cools the computers properly, so that smell wasn't there, but that's okay. To get to this floor though, we have the strictest levels of control. So you go into this man-trap room, and before you're allowed to enter, we call that a circle lock. Before you're able to enter the circle lock, you have to go through metal detection, and the metal detectors are recalibrated on a regular basis for like the teensiest, tiniest bits of metal. So you have to go through metal detection, and then any device, it must be a corporate device, and there's a 24-hour security guard that's positioned in every door to a server room, and they'll check your devices to validate that they are the appropriate corporate devices. And then once you've gone through all of that, you can badge yourself into this circle lock, and then you'll have an iris scan to validate your identity. If your iris scan is successful, then you can enter the server floor. If your iris scan is not successful, you're momentarily trapped in a small space, which is not fun. And then there is one more layer after that, layer 6. This is our most sensitive area in a data center, and it's where any hard drive that has reached end of life or is damaged in some way gets shredded. So no hard drives are being walked out of the server floor without being destroyed first. And there are varying levels of ways that we do this. Sometimes once you enter the room, there's a wall of like lockers, and someone from the outside will put the hard drives in, the person on the inside will take them out. The machines here are automated, so they scan the number on the hard drive, and they're tracked in a system to make sure that everything's getting destroyed as it should be. Okay, so how can the physical security controls that are used to protect these data centers be used in a cybersecurity setting? There are 3 things that I'll go through that I noticed physical security does so well that are sometimes lacking in cyber. The first is well-executed detective controls. So if anyone's not aware, detective control is a control that's designed to find problems after they've occurred. And I found that in cybersecurity, these can often, like I said, be lacking. And I'll ask for a detective control, and the example I'll get is, oh yeah, we have logs, and that's the detective control. But that's not necessarily enough. So a good detective control has to be targeted. Like, what are you logging? What things are important to you? What things represent the highest risk? And they need to be well documented and not just written down on a document in your personal drive, but for something to be well documented, it needs to be accessible to all of the individuals who need to follow like that policy or document. And then it needs to have that control needs to have a responsible human that is the go-to person for making sure it's executed appropriately. An example for this at data centers is like kind of a basic example, but for door alarms. So for door alarms at a data center, we have a policy where it says, for these types of doors, these are the alarms that should be enabled, and it's going up in severity. And that document is stored in a central location that any SOC operator can access so that everybody is aware of what the expectation is for that control. And that way there's a cohesive implementation of the control. And it also, on the policy itself, will have who the appropriate human is that should be executing it. The next is that principle of least privilege is strictly enforced. So principle of least privilege is the concept of limiting a user's access to only the resources they need to perform their job. From a physical security perspective, the things that I've seen where it's gone very, very well is that you create and follow an access policy. So whenever I've needed to go to a data center, or whenever an audit team needs to go to a data center, your access with your badge is granted the morning you need access, and then it's terminated automatically when you need to leave the data center. If you want additional access or you need to stay for an additional day, you have to go through this large approval process all over again. And that works well because there's an access policy that says if you are a security guard, here is what you have access to. If you are working in the SOC, here are the doors that you should have access to. If you're working in disk erase, here are the doors you should have access to. And then, like I said, you need to automate access removals if possible. If an individual is terminated, their access should be removed automatically so that you don't have accounts sitting forever for access. I think when I left a previous company, I still maintained access to a lot of things for quite a few months after I left the company, and we want to avoid that as much as possible. So if your access is terminated, it's a good way to limit risk. And then the last one, I'm an auditor, so I'm going to say a lot about like policies and access reviews, so I apologize in advance, but I can't help it, is to implement access reviews. And this can be done quarterly basis, biannual, annual. What I always advise teams to do is to mark what things are of highest risk, what systems are the highest, what systems carry the highest level of risk if you don't have the bandwidth to do access reviews for everything, and then you can implement access reviews for just those high-risk systems. Okay, the last one is don't half-do defense in depth. So for anyone who doesn't know, defense in depth is a type of cybersecurity where there are independent layers of controls, and so if one fails, another will be operating. Data centers do this very, very well with the physical side, and I'll get to that. But I have seen often in cybersecurity where one layer is not required to be perfect because, oh, we have another layer. For example, you find a cross-site scripting vulnerability and you're told, yeah, there's a cross-site scripting vulnerability there, but you have to be authenticated to access it. Or you find an API that doesn't require authentication, and you get told, that API doesn't require authentication, but we're not using it anymore, and it's not available on the front end, so it doesn't really matter. But when you don't have every layer treated as if it's your only layer, then you don't have defense in depth or true defense in depth. You just have a bunch of like half-done layers of security. At a data center, if there is a hole in your fence line at the perimeter, regardless of the fact that you have thermal cameras, the fact that there's badge access, the fact that there are security guards roaming the grounds, that hole at the fence line will be treated as a P0 priority, and it will be fixed that day. or the next day, but it will be fixed as quickly as possible, even though there are compensating controls in place. So if you don't, treat every layer as if it's your only layer, and that's how you can successfully achieve defense in depth. Takeaways. So number one is that detective controls should be well executed. Well executed detective control is targeted, documented, and has a responsible human. And then you need to strictly enforce principle of least privilege. At a data center, there's no way a person who has SOC access needs server floor access and vice versa. So it's strictly implemented, and the way to do that is to document what is appropriate, automate where you can, and then review the most highly sensitive systems. And then the last one is don't half-ass defense in depth. Treat every layer of defense as if it's your only layer to ensure that it's actually secure and you actually have defense in depth. That was pretty fast. Thank you. If you want to talk to me, I won't do a Q&A up here, but if you want to talk to me, I'm happy to chat on the floor. I usually talk at cybersecurity conferences, so I never put a QR code because no one ever scans them there. So thank you so much, and if you want to chat, I'll be available somewhere.